back again. Solitude. Now, solitude is fundamental to finding out who you are and more understanding who you are, right? You don't actually know who you are, I don't think. At least that's what I think so far at 22. But you must observe yourself as if you're another person to kind of find out who you are, what your tendencies are, why you say certain things. Perhaps you picked up certain habits growing up and defense mechanisms, and the way that you start to actually view yourself, you can only do through solitude. Right. Now, we got our mic here. Okay. Solitude. Usually people find this out. Well, actually, I don't think a lot of people do. Anyway, growing up, you never really have solitude. Unless you're an only child, which I'm not, you've possibly found this out way earlier than most people. Most people do not have any solitude at all growing up, right? Until the age of 18. Growing up, you're with your parents all the time. If you're not with your parents, you're at school with other people around all the time. And then you go to a childminders, perhaps. I went to a childminder, so you're around them and other kids all the time. You come home, you're around your parents all the time. Pardon me, excuse me. You're around your parents all the time. And then when you're not around your parents, right, let's say you're watching the TV. Well, you're watching the TV. That's not solitude. Solitude is not when you are distracting yourself with entertainment, right? That's not exactly solitude. It's perhaps closer to solitude than being with other people, but that's not solitude in itself. So even when you're not with anyone growing up, you're not with your parents, whatever, usually, I played with DS as a kid and a Game Boy and a PSP with my brother, right? You're playing this, you're playing that. You're only thinking about that. You're not actually in a state of solitude. So you're doing that. You're constantly distracted and taking other things in and around people. And if you're not around people, you're being entertained, right? All the way up until you're 18, you go into college or sixth form, you don't really have much solitude. You might do a little bit. I started to have a bit more, as I started to study on my own and really take school a bit more seriously so I didn't fail. I started to read books and do this and that, but you are still obviously being entertained, right? Reading books is essentially a form of entertainment, even if you're learning stuff. So, when did I experience my first real bit of solitude? Well, that was at uni, right? At university or college in America. When I went to uni, first of all, it was the worst experience of my entire life, all 3 years. The first 2 years I was at uni in Bristol, I essentially had basically zero friends. There was a guy that was from my friend group at home that went there, and I would occasionally see him. And I made one or two, friends, whatever, and saw them a little bit in uni. But essentially, I was very much, on my own, right? Because I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs. I like to get up early. I'll get up at 5 or something, go to bed at 9 and read my book, and go to the gym and do some MMA and kickboxing. So essentially on my own. I was friendly with people. I didn't have too much trouble interacting with people. There'd be days I didn't say anything. There'd literally be 1, 2, 3 days I didn't say a word to anyone. Not even myself, right? Just go shopping. Might have had headphones in, podcast, didn't say anything, right? This is where I started to experience my own bit of solitude. Now, I guess the difference I can pull the definitions up, but it's probably going to flow better if I speak. The difference between solitude and loneliness is basically about comfort, right? Loneliness is almost like an inability to actually be not lonely. I know you can't use the word in definition, right? But to be not lonely. Loneliness is like the inability to make friends and be sociable. And, it's almost like, oh, this is happening to me. Whereas solitude's almost like you're happening to it, right? It's the same state in that you're on your own, but solitude is like at any point I could make friends and go and meet up with certain people and do this and that. Now I'm not in solitude, right? So it's almost like you're happening to being on your own instead of being on your own. It's happening to you, and you're like, why me? That is the difference between solitude and loneliness. Now, I got a recap on the video. It's fundamental to find out who you are. That's it. So, when I was 19, I believe, I worked at Sainsbury's, right? If you don't know what Sainsbury's is, it's a supermarket in the UK. Now, I worked in the chiller in Sainsbury's at 4 a.m. until 12 every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, 8 hours. I was the only person in there, massive industrial fridge, right? I would have to wrap up in thermal, 5 layers, hat, 2 layers of gloves, and I'll be on my own for 8 hours every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'd have to get up at 3:30 a.m. to make it to work for 4. You know, no one's up, no one's doing anything apart from all the people coming back from their night out at uni, and I'm cycling into work in my Sainsbury's uniform. I'm on my own. I get to work. I'm on my own. No one's there. And, you know, it was during this time that you really start to find out who you are. Now, what does that look like? Well, you start to think back at all of your behaviors that, you know, you kind of exhibit in school and growing up and towards other people. For example, it's like a Buddhist inspired symbol. It's prominent in Buddhism. A karma tattoo. Oh, you can't even see it, I don't think. I've got a karma tattoo on my arm here, you know, an endless knot, right? And the reason I got it at 18, is because I noticed that I could actually be quite a dick, for the lack of a better term, to my friends, right? People I cared about, or my family. Probably comes from lower empathy. I noticed that within myself, you know. I'd kind of say something to my mum or whatever, you know, be a bit rude. And then straight after, I started to think, why do you even say that? You know, that's like a little bit rude. Or to my friends, you know, I'd notice behaviors that would just be like, you did something you didn't really have to, a little bit rude. What was the point in that? And so I noticed that within myself. That's why I got that to remind me, okay, maybe let's try not be a dick to people anymore, you know. It's going to come back to you. Do not do that, right? That's why I got that. And when you are in solitude, as you grow up, you start to think about all your behaviors that you built up as a kid, all of these things you reinforced. And you start to go, oh, like, was that me? Was that my circumstance? And you start to see you as another person, right? And this only happens when you are alone. Why does it only happen when you are alone, Max? Why? Well, because you cannot think and be introspective when there are other things going on. When you are talking to someone, when you are talking to this person, when you are doing this activity, or mostly, when you are watching this TV, when you are around your parents, when you're around these people, around this, around all of these distractions, you cannot be introspective, right? There is a reason people meditate. What is meditating? It's when you sit there, close your eyes so you cannot have any visual distractions, and you introspect, intense introspection. That's what meditation is. Well, solitude is similar in that you have nothing else really coming in. You are possibly doing a monotonous task like walking without headphones, or for me in Sainsbury's, I was organizing in the chiller, right? And all I can hear is the fan. That's all I can hear for 8 hours. That is when you have a chance to introspect. And that only happens when you have proper solitude. Now, you learn a lot about yourself, right? And you start to think, well, is that myself? Is that just a bad habit that was reinforced and it's not really anything to do with me? And you pick up on all these traits that you have. Like, for me, I was like, oh, I'm actually pretty low in empathy, right? Obviously, we've already talked about that. Oh, I'm actually really selfish a lot of the time, you know. But I can actually be kind to people, and when I give something to someone of my own volition, it makes me feel really good. But if I give something to someone because someone else asked me or implied that I should, I don't like it. Well, why is that? It's the same act. And you start to realize all these things about yourself. And then when you finally go back to seeing people again, right? Obviously, I don't recommend what I did at uni. Basically, went 2 years without speaking to anyone. There are a lot of downsides to that, by the way. When you finally go back to people, they kind of look at you, and once they interact with you, you're just way more mature, right? That's the best word for it. You're way more mature. You understand things a lot more. When someone acts a certain way, you can see the pattern and why they're acting that way, perhaps. And maybe they feel a bit uncomfortable right now. Maybe I'm in a group scenario and they feel a little bit backed into a corner because of how we are speaking or whatever. And you can kind of work your way around other people as well now because you understand yourself better, right? And by no means do I understand myself fully at all, right? I still don't even know who I am. But that is the benefit of solitude. You can understand yourself way more, and it's the only real way to understand yourself way more and what you're like and your triggers and your habits and your tendencies. And then once you've done that, because most people haven't, when you then go to interact with other people, they think you're way more mature, right? And then when you couple that with, reading more, trying to become more cultured, whatever that means, learning about everything else more in society, then you are levels above most other people, because most other people go around their whole day being distracted, right? They go around their whole day being distracted by screens, by their phone nowadays, right? By computers, everything. If you go to the train anytime around rush hour, a full train, you will see everyone like that, like a zombie. No one's just sitting there looking around, you know, and you must almost be in a state of boredom to be introspective and to actually think properly, right? But anyway, that's the end of this video. And yeah, solitude is the only real way to find out more about yourself, who you are, what you're like, your tendencies. So if you're struggling right now with, being very confused in what you're doing, I'd recommend experiencing more solitude. Go out on long walks without your phone. Even if it's in your pocket, still a bit of a distraction. Go out on long walks without your phone. Sit down on a random park bench. Just look around, and your mind will drift. It will drift through different things, thinking about this, and suddenly it will jump there. Suddenly it will jump there, and the key is you just let it. You just let it, right? Or you can almost be in a state of solitude if you're gardening or doing something like that. You're just doing a task with nothing going on. That's it. But yeah, I'd recommend it if you do not know who you are or struggle with that kind of self-identity aspect of life. Yeah, that is the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Any thoughts about it, please drop it in the comments because I would like to learn more as well. And yeah, my mic's still on. Thank fuck for that. Let's figure out how to turn this fucker off again. See you in the next video. Did we do it? Oh, we didn't do it. Fuck.